I never thought I would be the kind of person who would cross a line so sharp that it could never be stepped back over again. But the truth is, I did. My sister never agrees with me in our family meetings. She always stands on the other side, no matter how logical or fair my point is. And after years of fighting her at that table, I reached my breaking point. I told her secret to her husband. It wasn't a small secret. It was the kind of secret that can turn a home into a ruin. Even as I say this now, I know that I crossed a line that can never be uncrossed, but I also know that I had been pushed into a corner for too long. That corner was built brick by her, one family meeting at a time, until I was left with nowhere else to stand. My name isn't the important part. What matters is the weight of everything that happened, and the way it slowly grew inside me like something rotting and spreading. My sister's name is Clara. She has always been the kind of person who thrives on control. If the room leans one way, she leans the other. If a decision can be made, she will argue against it until everyone is too tired to fight back. It wasn't just some personality quirk. It was a habit, almost like she needed to win even when winning meant nothing. And when it came to our family meetings, that habit became her weapon. Our family is from Florida. The meetings were always held in our parents' house in Sarasota. It was the house we grew up in, a warm place with fading blue paint, an old porch swing, and a kitchen that always smelled like coffee. That house is more than just wood and brick. It is the center of everything. When we were kids, we would sit around the table and eat cornbread with butter. As adults, we sat at the same table to talk about money, responsibility, and the house itself. It was strange how the same table that once held our laughter became the place where we tore into each other. When our parents got older, the meetings became more serious. My father's health had started to decline. My mother could no longer take care of everything by herself. The house was aging, and the bills were piling up. At first, we thought these meetings would be calm discussions about how to share responsibilities, but they became battlegrounds. Clara turned every single subject into a war. If I suggested selling the old fishing boat that no one used, she would block it. If I brought up hiring a nurse to help my mother, she would call it unnecessary. If I mentioned fixing the roof, she would argue about the cost until weeks passed and rainwater poured into the living room again. It was never about the actual issue. It was about her needing to be the one who decided. She would cross her arms, tilt her head, and refuse to agree. And our parents would just let her keep talking until everyone else gave up. I learned to keep a calm face while inside I wanted to scream. The meetings started feeling like walking into a storm you already know will destroy something, even if it's just your hope for peace. Then the stakes got higher. My father's health became more fragile, and my mother's hands shook more when she poured her tea. We needed a solution. The house needed expensive repairs. We needed to decide whether to sell the house or take a loan. I suggested selling it. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the fact that no one could take care of it anymore. Clara said no. She said it like the word was made of stone, unbreakable and cold. She insisted the house should stay exactly as it was, even though she wasn't willing to help pay for the repairs or move in to take care of our parents. She lived 2 hours away with her husband in a big house with perfect white walls and a pool in the backyard. She loved control, but she didn't love responsibility. For a long time, I kept quiet. I let her take the lead in every fight. But something inside me started building pressure. Every disagreement left a scar. Every stubborn no made the corner I was standing in smaller. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about years of watching her get away with everything, years of watching her make a mess and never clean it up. And somewhere in the middle of those meetings, I realized that I had something she didn't know I would use. I knew a secret. I had known it for a long time. I learned it one night when she thought no one was watching. I won't pretend it didn't shake me when I found out. I sat on that knowledge like someone holding a loaded gun in a quiet room. The secret wasn't about me. It was about her and her husband. Clara's husband, Michael, trusted her completely. He believed she was loyal and honest. He believed she was exactly who she said she was. But she wasn't. She had done something that could break her marriage in a single breath. And I had proof. Real, hard proof. I had found out about her infidelity years ago. It happened before one of the big family meetings. She thought no one would ever find out. She met someone in another city, and she let that mistake turn into something permanent. I saw the hotel bills. I saw the hidden credit card statements. She didn't even know I knew. I could have said something then, but I didn't. I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself secrets like that shouldn't be used as weapons. But over time, as she kept tearing down everything I built, the line between right and wrong started to blur. I started to think about the fact that she had no problem making my life harder. She had no problem watching our parents' house fall apart. And she had no idea that the very person she thought she could always control was holding the key to destroying the image she built. Each family meeting became harder to sit through. I could feel the secret pulsing at the back of my mind like a heartbeat. I would look at her across the table. She would have that same smug look, that same tilt of her head, that same stubbornness. She thought she was untouchable. And I sat there knowing she wasn't. It was a strange power, one that felt both heavy and dangerous. I never wanted to be the person who used it. But the more she pushed, the closer I got to the edge. The last straw wasn't dramatic at first. It was another family meeting, another argument, another no. But this time, the stakes were different. The bank had sent a final notice. If we didn't make a decision about the house soon, we would lose it. I had found a buyer who was willing to offer enough to cover the debt and give our parents some comfort. All Clara had to do was agree, and she didn't. She sat there and said no. She said we would figure it out later, even though later meant the house would be taken away from us. That was the moment I knew something inside me had snapped. I walked out of that meeting feeling like I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking. My chest felt like a locked door. And behind that door was everything I had held back. I thought about what she had done. I thought about every single meeting where she blocked me just because she could. I thought about the house, the history it held, and the fact that I was about to lose it because of her need to win. I thought about the secret. And for the first time, I didn't just think about it as a burden. I thought about it as a weapon. I knew Michael loved her. He believed in her. He trusted every word she said. And she took that trust and threw it away. I didn't tell him when I first found out, because I didn't want to destroy their marriage. But now, watching everything around me fall apart, I started to wonder if protecting her had only made her worse. Maybe she believed nothing could touch her. Maybe she believed she could keep winning because I would always play fair. But I wasn't playing anymore. That night I sat in my car outside the house. The porch light was on. The swing creaked in the wind. I stared at the house that had raised me, the house that was slipping through my fingers, and I made a decision that changed everything. I decided that I would tell her husband the truth, not out of spite, but because I couldn't let her keep destroying everything for the sake of her pride. It wasn't an easy decision. It wasn't something I felt proud of. but it was the only card I had left to play. I wish I could say I didn't hesitate, but I did. For hours, I sat there thinking about what would happen, about how everything would crumble when the truth came out, about how she would look at me when she found out it was me who told him. I knew she would never forgive me. I knew this would break more than just her marriage. It would break the fragile threads that still held our family together. But I also knew that I couldn't keep letting her tear me down without ever facing a single consequence. This wasn't just about her. This was about everything she had taken from me without a second thought. As the sun started to rise, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Resolve. It was cold and clear. It sat heavy in my chest, but it didn't move. I knew exactly what I was going to do. And I knew that once I did it, there would be no going back. Please listen to my story and tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong, because she didn't just disagree with me. She stood in front of me and blocked every path until I had no choice but to burn the bridge she stood on. When I walked away from that last family meeting, I knew I had crossed an invisible point inside myself. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just went home with the sound of Clara's voice still echoing in my ears, sharp and stubborn like it had always been. It was the sound that had filled those meetings for years. I used to think if I stayed calm long enough, reason would finally matter. But reason had never mattered to her. Control was all that ever mattered. She had won for so long that she couldn't imagine losing. The family meetings had started years ago as something simple. My father had just begun to need help around the house. My mother had started getting tired faster than she used to. At first, it was about groceries, bills, and cleaning schedules. Then it became about power. Clara always wanted to be the one making the decisions, but she didn't want to carry the weight of them. She loved to argue about everything, but never offered a real solution. She would say we needed to keep the house, but wouldn't pay for the repairs. She would insist on keeping my parents at home, but refused to help with their care. If someone else offered a reasonable idea, she would tear it down and make everyone feel guilty for disagreeing with her. I still remember one of those early meetings. The sunlight would pour through the kitchen window, making everything look soft and warm. My father would sit at the head of the table, his breathing already a little heavier back then. My mother would sit beside him, stirring sugar into her coffee with hands that trembled just slightly. I would try to present ideas with charts and numbers, hoping logic would mean something to Clara, but she would lean back, cross her legs, and act like none of it mattered. She would shake her head before I even finished talking, like she had already decided she was against me, no matter what I said. Over the years, the meetings changed in tone. The light in the kitchen started feeling harsher. The air grew heavier. People spoke less. It became less about helping and more about surviving the storm that always followed Clara's words. She liked to use guilt. She liked to make everyone feel like if they disagreed with her, they were betraying the family. She would remind everyone how much time she spent with our parents on holidays. She would bring up how she visited last Thanksgiving, as if that gave her a lifetime right to make every decision. I had tried everything. I had tried kindness. I had tried firmness. I had tried stepping back. I had tried confronting her privately. None of it worked. She always found a way to twist things until she stood on top of the conversation like a queen on a crumbling hill. It wasn't just me she controlled. She had this way of making our parents feel like they needed to agree with her. My mother hated conflict. She would pick Clara's side just to keep the peace. My father, when he was stronger, used to push back. But as his health declined, he didn't have the energy anymore. So Clara's voice became the loudest one in the room, and the rest of us just stopped fighting as hard. But I never stopped keeping track. I kept every letter from the bank. I kept every estimate for the roof repairs. I kept every email she ignored. I kept everything because part of me knew that if something big ever happened, I would need to show exactly how many times she had let things rot. Then the big thing did happen. The bank notice. The final one. The one that made it clear there was no more time. The house wasn't just in danger of falling apart anymore. It was in danger of being taken away. I went into that last meeting knowing that we were at the edge of the cliff. I presented the offer from the buyer. It was a fair price. It would pay off everything. It would leave my parents with enough to live comfortably in assisted living. It was the best option. Clara didn't care. She didn't even pretend to think about it. She said no the moment I opened my mouth, and the way she said it told me everything I needed to know. She didn't care what happened to the house. She just cared that it wasn't me making the decision. She leaned back in her chair like she always did. She crossed her arms. She stared at me with that cold look. She told everyone that selling the house would be a betrayal. She talked about family history. She talked about our father's hands building the porch. She talked about summer nights and warm bread and holidays. But she didn't talk about the leaking roof or the bank notice. She didn't talk about unpaid bills. She didn't talk about our parents being one step away from losing everything they built. She wrapped herself in the past like a blanket and left the present to rot. I felt the room tilt. I watched as my mother sighed and looked down at her hands. I watched as my father, too tired to fight, just stayed silent. I watched as Clara took control again like she always did. And in that moment, something sharp lodged itself inside me. It wasn't just anger. It was a sense of being trapped. She wasn't just standing in the way of a decision. She was standing in the way of my parents' security, my future, and the house itself. And she was doing it without a care in the world. I didn't say anything then. I just left. But leaving didn't make the pressure inside me stop. It grew. It grew when I got the second letter from the bank. It grew when my mother called me crying because she didn't know what to do. It grew when I looked at the house and saw the porch sagging a little lower than before. It grew until the secret I had been holding didn't feel like a buried thing anymore. It felt like something pushing against my ribs, demanding to be used. The secret had been sitting quietly in the background for years. It had its own history. Years ago, Clara had gone to a weekend conference for her job. She said it was just work. But I knew something was off when I got a call from a credit card company asking if I recognized charges made at a hotel in another city. She had used our shared family account by mistake. I found the bill. I saw the name of the hotel. I saw the charges that made no sense for a work trip. Then months later, I found more. Another trip. More hotel bills. She was careful, but not careful enough. She didn't know that some mail still came to my parents' house. She didn't know I had seen everything. I told myself I would never use it. I told myself that her marriage was her business, not mine. I watched her stand next to Michael during holidays, holding his hand and smiling like nothing was wrong. He looked at her like she was the most solid thing in his world. He trusted her completely. And she let him. For years I let that secret sit. But when she blocked the house sale, when she pushed me to the edge, the secret started whispering at me. I thought about it in the shower, in the car, while lying awake at night. I imagined what would happen if he found out. I imagined how her perfect little life would crack. And then I felt guilty for thinking it. But then she would send another email, dismissing my plans for the house, and the guilt would fade. It was replaced with something colder, something sharper. I started to keep track of everything more carefully. I pulled the old credit card bills from the box where I had stored them. I went through emails. I built a timeline. It wasn't because I had made the decision yet. It was because I needed to know if I could prove it, if I ever did. I needed to know that if I dropped the match, the fire would burn clean and fast, and I could. Michael wasn't just her husband. He was also tied to the house. Years ago, when my parents had trouble paying property taxes, Michael had helped co-sign a temporary loan. His name was on some of the paperwork. That gave him legal interest in what happened, and Clara had no idea how dangerous that was for her. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that telling him wouldn't just destroy her marriage. It would remove her power in the family meetings. If he knew the truth, if their life cracked open, she wouldn't have the same grip on everyone anymore. Her authority came from the image she had built, and the secret was the hammer that could shatter it. But I didn't act right away. I spent weeks in that space between wanting to and being terrified of what it would mean if I did. I thought about our parents. I thought about the house. I thought about every argument. I thought about how I would look if I did it. I knew that even if I was right, some people would say I was wrong for bringing something personal into it. But I also knew that she wasn't going to stop. I was running out of time. Then the day came when my mother called me crying again. The bank had called her directly. They told her if something wasn't done soon, they would start legal action. My mother's voice cracked. She said she didn't know what to do. I felt something shift inside me. I couldn't let Clara keep holding everything hostage. I couldn't let her ruin the house, my parents' security, and my future just because she liked being in control. That night I opened the box with the old bills. I laid everything out on my kitchen table. I spread the papers in a neat row, and I made my plan. The plan wasn't rushed. It was careful, cold. I didn't want this to be a screaming match or a messy fight. I wanted this to be something she couldn't undo. I decided to meet Michael in private. I didn't want her to be able to twist the story or lie her way out of it. I wanted him to see everything with his own eyes. I chose a coffee shop near his office, a neutral place. I printed everything. I put it in a neat folder. I even called a lawyer friend to ask about the legal side of things. I learned what would happen if he decided to file for separation. I learned what would happen with their joint assets. I learned exactly what kind of ground I was standing on. Every step of that preparation made me feel heavier, but it also made me feel clearer. I had been on the defensive for years. Now I was finally setting the terms. I was finally choosing the field. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to put the truth in front of him and let it do what it would do. When the day came, I woke up early. I didn't sleep much the night before. I kept thinking about the years of meetings, the years of her blocking me, the years of her walking around like nothing could touch her. I got dressed. I picked up the folder. I drove to the coffee shop. Michael was already there when I arrived. He was always on time. He had that kind of quiet, reliable energy. That was part of why the secret was so cruel. He didn't deserve it. I walked in, ordered a coffee I didn't drink, and sat down across from him. He looked at me, a little confused. He didn't know why I had asked to meet. And then I opened the folder. I didn't say much. I didn't have to. The papers said everything. The dates, the hotel bills, the proof. I placed them on the table one by one. I watched his face change. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was like watching something break behind his eyes. Quiet, slow, final. He didn't yell. He didn't ask questions. He just stared at the papers for a long time. Then he nodded once, like someone who had reached the end of something and knew it. When I left the coffee shop, I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel guilt. I felt stillness. It was the kind of stillness that comes after a long storm when the sky is too quiet. I knew everything had just changed. I knew there was no going back. The match had been struck. The fallout came fast, and Michael moved out of their house 2 days later. Clara called my phone over and over again, but I didn't pick up. My mother called. My aunt called. My cousin called. People whispered. People speculated. But Clara didn't whisper. She screamed. Not at me directly, because I never gave her the chance. She screamed to anyone who would listen. She told them I was a monster. She told them I had destroyed her life. She didn't tell them what she had done to Michael. She didn't tell them why he packed his bags, and the family was split. Some people sided with her. They said I had gone too far. They said family matters should stay inside the family. They said I shouldn't have used her secret. But others didn't say anything at all. They remembered the meetings. They remembered the way she had held everything hostage for years. They remembered the bills, the house, the way she made decisions without ever helping, and those people stayed quiet because they understood. I went to the next family meeting with a folder under my arm, not the one with her secret. That job was already done. This was a folder with the house documents, the loan, and the new papers drawn up with Michael's signature. He had already signed over his part of the legal decision-making. He had no reason to keep protecting her interests. She had burned that bridge on her own. She wasn't at the meeting. She didn't show her face. My mother was quiet. My father's eyes were tired. The rest of the family didn't know how to look at me. I didn't ask them to. I presented the new papers. I told them the house could finally be sold. I told them the bank wouldn't take it. I told them our parents could be taken care of. There were no arguments this time. Clara wasn't there to block it. For the first time in years, a decision was made in that room without a fight, but it wasn't clean. Nothing this big ever is. Clara called me later, over and over. She left voicemails that I didn't listen to. I knew what she would say. She would say I ruined her life. She would say I betrayed her. She would ignore everything she did to create the mess in the first place, and she would never, ever admit that she had brought this on herself. When the house went into escrow, the rest of the family started whispering less. They started understanding what this meant. Without her blocking everything, things moved fast. Repairs were scheduled. Bills were paid. My parents started the process of moving into assisted living. For the first time in years, things weren't stuck in place, but Clara was stuck. Her marriage was breaking. Her husband filed for separation. Her friends started pulling away. The perfect image she had built cracked wide open. She stopped showing up to family events. She stopped calling my parents. She stopped fighting because there was nothing left for her to control. The family wasn't kind about it. They talked. They whispered. They judged. Some of them blamed me, but most of them blamed her. They remembered how many times she could have made things easier and chose to make them harder. And even if they didn't say it out loud, they knew she had played a big part in her own downfall. But I still carried the weight of it. I still thought about that morning in the coffee shop. I still saw Michael's face in my mind. I still felt the sharpness of the moment I slid those papers across the table. I had told myself it was necessary, and in many ways it was. But necessary doesn't mean easy. Necessary doesn't mean painless. It just means it had to happen. Some nights I would sit in the car outside the house and look at the porch. the same porch that had been in danger of being lost forever. I would watch the swing creak in the wind. I would think about how many years that house had held our lives together, and how in the end the truth had been the hammer that finally broke the chain Clara wrapped around it. And then the real backlash began. Clara showed up at my parents' assisted living facility one afternoon. She stood outside like a storm waiting to hit. She wasn't the same anymore. Her eyes were red, her hair was messy, and her voice didn't have that same smooth control it used to. She didn't have the power she once had, and she hated me for it. She told everyone I was the reason her life was falling apart. She told them I was cruel. She told them I used something personal to get what I wanted. And she wasn't wrong. I did use it, but I used it because she had left me no other way out. Our relatives gathered at the next family meeting, even the ones who usually stayed out of it. It wasn't a normal meeting. It was more like a reckoning. Clara stood in front of everyone and painted herself as the victim. She cried. She talked about betrayal. She talked about family. She talked about trust. But she didn't talk about the years she spent standing in the way of every decision. She didn't talk about the bank letters. She didn't talk about the way she made sure no one could move forward unless she said yes. I stood there quietly while they all looked at me, some with judgment, some with quiet understanding. I didn't defend myself. I didn't have to. Everyone already knew the truth. It wasn't hidden anymore. Now this is where I did something that I want you to advise me if I was right or wrong. I refused to answer her calls. I presented the proof to the family elders. I signed the emergency legal documents with Michael that finally took away her control over the house. I took the power she had used to crush me for years, and I used it to protect what mattered. I didn't apologize for it. I didn't hide from it. I owned it. When the meeting ended, Clara stormed out. She didn't look back. The family was fractured after that day. Some of them couldn't forgive me for using the secret. Some of them couldn't forgive her for forcing everything to reach that point. But no one could deny that the house was saved. My parents were safe. The endless cycle of arguments was finally over. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way they hadn't been in years. I didn't get angry emails anymore. I didn't get long voicemails. I didn't have to prepare for another battle around the table. But quiet doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it means the echoes of everything that was said still hang in the air, waiting to be felt. I saw Clara once more during that time. She didn't say anything to me. She just stood across the parking lot of the assisted living home, watching me help our mother out of the car. Her face was unreadable. I didn't wave. She didn't wave. There was nothing left to say. She wasn't the loud voice at the table anymore. She wasn't the one pulling the strings. She was just a woman standing in the cold light of the truth, watching everything she built fall apart. I didn't feel joy in that moment. I didn't feel guilt either. I felt something quieter, something heavier. It was the cost of winning. The cost of finally pushing back after being cornered for years. It wasn't clean. It wasn't fair. But it was real. And sometimes real is the only thing left. Clara's unraveling didn't happen all at once. It began in small cracks that only I noticed at first. She had always walked into every family space like the room belonged to her. But after Michael left, she didn't have the same posture anymore. Her voice lost that sharpness. Her hands fidgeted when people looked at her too long. She used to hold her head high like nothing could touch her. Now she carried herself like someone who could hear whispers even in silence. She called me 17 times the first night. I let the phone ring every single time. It wasn't because I didn't know what she wanted. I knew exactly what she wanted. She wanted to control the narrative like she always had. She wanted to twist what I did into something dirty and cruel. But she couldn't control this anymore. She didn't know how to live without that power, and watching her stumble through it was like watching someone used to dancing on ice suddenly realize the ice was cracking beneath their feet. The next morning, she tried something else. She showed up at my house. She stood on my porch, pounding on the door like she was entitled to an explanation. I didn't open it. I watched her through the blinds as she paced back and forth, her hair pulled back too tightly, her hands shaking. For the first time in my life, she looked unsure, not angry, not smug, just lost. She left after 20 minutes, but she came back the next day, and the next. Each time her voice got louder. Each time she tried a different tone, sometimes pleading, sometimes threatening, sometimes pretending none of this was real. But I never opened the door. She couldn't face Michael. She couldn't face the way he had walked out of their house like everything they built was a sandcastle waiting for the tide. So she turned her rage toward me. She sent messages to relatives, spinning the story. She told them I had betrayed her. She told them I had done this out of jealousy. She painted herself as the victim. She always had a talent for rewriting the script in her favor. But this time the evidence was stronger than her words. The whispers didn't bend as easily as they used to. People asked her questions she couldn't answer. People looked at her differently. Even those who wanted to believe her saw the cracks. I wasn't naive. I knew she would fight. She wasn't the kind of person to collapse quietly. She had spent her entire life turning every problem into a battlefield. So when she started showing up at our parents' assisted living facility, trying to turn them against me, I was ready. She brought flowers, acted sweet, sat by our mother's bed, and talked about how cruel I was. But our mother wasn't the same as she used to be. She was tired of the fights. She saw through Clara more than she used to. My father said little, but when Clara tried to convince him that I had done something unforgivable, he just closed his eyes. That silence was louder than any argument. The more she realized she couldn't bend them, the more desperate she became. She called a family meeting herself. It was the first time she had ever been the one to call one. She wanted to turn the tide. She invited aunts, uncles, cousins, anyone who would listen. She picked the same kitchen table where she had ruled for so long. But when I walked in that day, the room didn't belong to her anymore. The air felt different. Everyone knew what had happened. No one said it out loud, but they didn't have to. Clara started with a speech. She talked about family. She talked about betrayal. She tried to make her voice sound steady, but it cracked around the edges. Her hands shook on the table. Her old armor of control was gone, and everyone saw it. She threw everything she could at me. She called me selfish. She called me cruel. She painted a picture of herself as a victim of my revenge. But the thing about someone who has always lied to get their way is that when they finally speak the truth, no one believes them. And when they lie again, it sounds even hollower. When she finished, the room went quiet. No one rushed to defend her, not even the aunts who had always adored her when we were kids. My father cleared his throat slow and deliberate. He looked at her the way someone looks at a stranger wearing a familiar face. My mother didn't look at her at all. And in that silence, Clara's power broke. She slammed her hands on the table. It wasn't the controlled gesture she used to use. It was messy, wild. She accused me of ruining her marriage. She accused me of exposing her to people who didn't need to know. She said I had destroyed the family. But the thing is, families don't fall apart because of the truth. They fall apart because of what was hidden before the truth came out. Everyone knew that, even if no one said it. I didn't shout back. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. I had spent years trying to win arguments with her. That day, I realized I didn't need to win anymore. She had already lost. The house papers were signed. The bank's claim was cleared. Michael had legally transferred all his interest in the property away from her. She couldn't stop the sale, even if she screamed until her voice bled. She stormed out of the meeting, slamming the door behind her. But the war wasn't over. Not for her. She tried everything. She called the bank pretending to be me. She tried to stall the sale by claiming she still had rights. But I had already worked with the lawyer. Every paper was airtight. Every move she tried to make had already been sealed off before she could even act. She wasn't used to being outplayed. Watching her try and fail again and again was like watching a trapped animal throw itself against a wall it couldn't break. The spiciest part of it all came when she tried to turn Michael back to her side. She showed up at his workplace, crying in the parking lot, begging him to forgive her. She had never begged for anything in her life. But Michael didn't go outside. He sent security instead. That moment hit her harder than anything I could have said. She couldn't manipulate him anymore. The one person she thought would always believe her had seen the proof. He had no reason to listen to her stories anymore. She called me again after that. Not just calls, long, desperate messages. She said I didn't understand what I had done. She said I had ripped her life apart. She said she hated me. She said she would never forgive me. She said she would make sure everyone saw me as the villain. She went from blaming me to begging me to fix it for her. But I didn't respond. Every message I ignored was a brick in the wall between us. The more she spiraled, the stronger I felt. Not in a cruel way, but in a steady way. For years she had been the storm. She had been the one shaking everything apart. Now she was the one flailing in the wind while I stood still for once. I had planned too carefully. She couldn't find a crack to crawl through. Then she made one last desperate move. She showed up at the house before closing, standing on the porch like a ghost trying to reclaim the place she once owned. It was raining, hard and heavy. She stood in the downpour screaming my name. I didn't open the door. I stood inside, watching the rain soak through her clothes. She wasn't the untouchable Clara anymore. She was just someone who had run out of moves. She pounded on the door until her voice went hoarse. She shouted things she could never take back. She said I would regret it. She said I would be alone. She said I had taken everything from her. But what she didn't understand was that she had taken everything from me long before I ever struck back. She had taken time, peace, family unity, and the chance to save the house without blood. She built this ending herself. When the house finally sold, she didn't show up to sign anything. She couldn't. Legally, she wasn't needed anymore. Her absence was louder than her presence had ever been. The family that had once followed her voice now sat at the kitchen table listening to mine, and I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. I just laid out the plans calmly, the way I always had, only now no one could block them. But the fire didn't burn out quietly. The whispers in the family grew sharper. Some relatives said I went too far. They said I could have handled it differently. They said secrets like that don't belong in family wars. But others saw the truth. They saw the years she had made everything impossible. They saw the way she tried to control everything without lifting a finger to help. They saw that this wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. And in the middle of all of this, Michael filed for divorce. Quietly, no spectacle, just cold legal finality. Clara had built her whole image on being perfect. And in one carefully planned moment, I had pulled the curtain back. The family saw her for what she really was. Michael saw it. The community saw it. And she couldn't bear it. She disappeared for a while after that. No calls, no texts, no messages, just silence. At first, it felt strange. For years, I had lived under the constant sound of her voice. The silence felt unnatural. But then it started to feel like oxygen. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe. The family house was no longer a battleground. It became a project again. Repairs began. New paint, new wood, a new roof. It didn't look the same, but it felt lighter. No one shouted in that kitchen anymore. No one crossed their arms and refused to agree. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was free. But Clara couldn't accept that. Weeks later, she sent me one final message. It wasn't angry. It wasn't pleading. It was cold. She said she would never forget what I did. She said one day I'd feel what she felt. But she was wrong about one thing. I had already felt it. I had felt it for years. I had lived with her control, her manipulation, her endless no's. What she was feeling now wasn't new. It was just her turn. Just when I thought the storm was passing, Clara struck back in a way I never expected. She had vanished for weeks. Everyone assumed she was licking her wounds somewhere far away, but silence had never meant surrender with her. I should have known she was planning something. She always planned in silence. She never accepted a loss without trying to scorch the ground on her way out. It started with a letter. Not to me, to the court. One cold envelope that hit harder than any words she had ever thrown at me. She filed a motion claiming I had coerced Michael into the divorce. She said I had falsified evidence. She painted herself as a woman trapped between a manipulative sibling and a broken marriage. She told the court that the proof I had given Michael wasn't real. She didn't have the power to undo the truth, but she had enough bitterness to drag me through the fire with her. My lawyer called me the moment the paperwork came through. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the same one where every war between us had started, staring at the words printed in black ink. She was trying to destroy me legally now. She wasn't just throwing stones. She was lighting matches. The shock wasn't in what she filed. It was in how far she was willing to go. She claimed I had hacked her accounts. She claimed I had manipulated family money to frame her. She claimed I had convinced Michael to leave her by promising him part of the estate. Lies layered on lies, all carefully arranged to look like a real story. She couldn't win with the truth, so she built a new lie big enough to burn everything down. But the real twist didn't come from the letter itself. It came from the fact that someone in the family had helped her write it. The details in her statement were too precise. She knew things about the bank meetings. She knew about conversations I'd only had with a handful of relatives I trusted. One of them had given her everything. One of them had chosen her side after everything she had done. I didn't know who at first, but I felt it like a knife in the back. The betrayal didn't come from outside anymore. It was growing from the inside. I had spent so much time fighting Clara that I never stopped to see who might quietly want me to fall too. It didn't take long to find out. My cousin Lisa's name showed up in the court records. She had signed an affidavit supporting Clara's claims. Lisa had always been quiet during the meetings, sitting near Clara but rarely speaking. I thought silence meant neutrality. I was wrong. She had been watching everything, storing details, waiting for the moment to use them. She had given Clara everything she needed to build her last weapon. The air shifted inside the family after that. Suddenly, this wasn't just about me and Clara anymore. It was about sides. Lines formed quietly. in whispers and careful glances. Some relatives didn't want to get involved. Others picked Clara's side out of guilt, pity, or old loyalty. Some sided with me, but not all. What had started as a clean strike against Clara had become a cold war inside the family. I could feel it at every gathering. At my parents' facility, conversations died when I entered. At the house renovation site, workers I'd hired told me Clara had been there asking questions. She was circling like a vulture, not to take back what she'd lost, but to poison everything I had built since she fell. The legal fight she started wasn't just paperwork. It was designed to bleed me. She knew I would have to respond. Lawyers cost money, time, energy. She didn't care if she won. She just wanted me to suffer the way she was suffering. She wanted to make every inch of my victory feel like a burden I couldn't carry. But the most shocking part came later. The bank called me one Friday morning. Clara had managed to temporarily freeze a portion of the sale funds using her claim. She had told the court the house was sold under fraudulent circumstances. For 48 hours, I couldn't access the money. For 48 hours, everything I had worked for was hanging on a thread she had wrapped around her fingers. It was like she had found a way to reach through the ashes and claw at me. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid of losing everything, but because I finally understood just how far she was willing to fall to drag me with her. This wasn't about property anymore. This was about destruction. She couldn't rebuild her life, so she decided no one else should live in peace either. Michael had moved on quietly. He had already cut her out of everything. But Clara refused to accept the silence. She showed up at his work again, this time not crying. This time she was holding legal papers of her own, trying to scare him too. She had started a campaign of chaos. She called family friends. She told them I was a liar. She told them Michael had cheated, not her. She twisted the story until even strangers didn't know what to believe. She couldn't win the truth, so she turned it into mud, thick enough to make everyone sink. But here's where it turned truly bad. Clara didn't just want to humiliate me. She wanted to break something I couldn't rebuild. She filed an anonymous complaint to the care home where our parents lived, claiming I had mishandled their finances. It was a lie, but the investigation froze their account temporarily. The staff pulled me into a room with stern faces. I sat there listening to strangers talk to me like I was some kind of thief, all because my sister couldn't stand the idea of losing. That was the moment I realized Clara's hatred wasn't just bitterness, it was bottomless. She was willing to hurt our parents to make me bleed. She didn't care who got caught in the blast anymore. I fought back quietly. I gathered every receipt, every statement, every transfer I had ever made. I built my defense brick by brick. And just like with Michael, I came armed with proof. But this time it didn't feel clean. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like dragging my own blood through courtrooms and investigations just to prove I wasn't the villain she wanted me to be. She kept leaking stories to family members. She told them I was trying to erase her. She told them I was a snake. Some of them believed her. Not because they thought she was right, but because they couldn't handle the ugliness of the truth. It was easier to believe in the villain she built than to face the fact that one of us had truly broken the family in half. The twist was brutal because it revealed something I had always tried not to admit. Clara wasn't just my rival. She was someone who would burn the entire house down if she couldn't live in it. And this time, the fire had spread beyond her marriage. It had reached every corner of our bloodline. The final sting of it came when the judge dismissed her case. The proof was overwhelming. Her lies fell apart under their own weight. Lisa withdrew her affidavit quietly, like a coward who didn't want to face the fallout. But the damage was already done. Even though I won, the whispers didn't die. Trust didn't come back. The family was divided like a mirror cracked down the middle. No matter how carefully I picked up the pieces, it would never be the same again. Clara didn't show up to the last hearing. She sent a lawyer instead. She didn't need to be there to win or lose. She had already achieved what she wanted. She had made sure the victory I fought for tasted like ash. After the funds were released and the house sale finalized, I stood in the empty living room alone. The walls echoed. It was over legally, but it wasn't over emotionally. Clara had made sure of that. She had carved a scar that wouldn't fade. She had taken something pure, a family legacy, a home, a shared history, and turned it into a battlefield no one wanted to walk on anymore. I thought exposing her secret would end the war. I was wrong. It didn't end the war. It changed its shape. It turned it into something colder, quieter, more poisonous. Clara had lost her husband, her marriage, and her reputation, but she had found something else to live for. Revenge. And in that twisted way, she had won something too. She had made sure I could never have a clean victory. She had made sure my triumph would always carry her fingerprints, like a stain I couldn't scrub out. When the house finally changed hands, it didn't feel like a victory. The papers were signed, the funds were released, and the locks were changed, but the air inside me felt hollow. I walked through the empty rooms one last time, letting my footsteps echo against the bare walls. For years, this place had been a battleground, a constant reminder of what we were fighting over. And now it wasn't ours anymore. The house was gone, but the war wasn't. The closing day was gray. No sun, no rain, just flat sky pressing down. I stood in the yard where Clara and I had played as kids. There had been a time when we laughed here without calculation. That memory felt foreign now, like something I had stolen from someone else's life. She had turned every family meeting into a performance, and I had turned my revenge into a weapon. Between those two forces, whatever was left of sisterhood had died quietly somewhere along the way. Michael's lawyer confirmed the divorce was finalized. He had moved to a different city, started a new job, and cut all contact with her. He didn't want anything from the house, not a cent. He didn't want her to have anything either. Clara had tried to fight the settlement, but the court had dismissed her claims as unfounded. She had lost in every legal sense. But she had made sure the loss didn't belong to her alone. I saw her again one last time before everything went quiet. It wasn't planned. I was at our parents' care facility, dropping off paperwork for the new trust account now fully under my control. She was in the hallway when I stepped out of the elevator. I hadn't seen her in months. She looked different. Not in the way time changes someone slowly, in the way storms hollow someone out. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes didn't match, and her face looked pale and sharp like she hadn't slept in days. But her eyes burned the same way they always had. That fire never went out. It just turned colder. She didn't speak. Neither did I. She didn't have to. The way she looked at me said everything. She had lost everything that had once made her powerful, but she still had hatred. And that was enough to keep her standing. I walked past her without breaking pace. I felt the weight of her gaze on my back like a curse. She wanted me to look back. She wanted me to see her pain, but I didn't give her that satisfaction. The family stopped having meetings after that. The kitchen table where everything happened was gone with the house. Without that place, there was no stage for her anymore. And without a stage, she faded into a shadow at the edges of family life. Some relatives still whispered about her. Some still pitied her. A few still hated me, but most learned to live around the wound, pretending it wasn't still bleeding beneath the surface. The legal noise quieted down slowly. Investigations were closed. Complaints were dismissed. Court dates were canceled. Clara ran out of moves. She didn't win a single battle. But she had made sure I didn't get to celebrate any of it. I got control of the funds from the sale, just like I'd fought for. Most of it went into my parents' care, some into a trust for the future. On paper, it was a win, a clean, documented, legally perfect victory. But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving a fire and standing in the ashes trying to remember why the house had been worth saving in the first place. Holidays became strange after that. There used to be big gatherings in Florida where everyone showed up. Now it was scattered and quiet. Some cousins didn't come anymore. Some aunts kept their distance. Lisa, the cousin who betrayed me, moved away. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't have to. The silence between us was already permanent. Our parents didn't talk about Clara anymore. They were tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of choosing. Tired of watching their children tear each other apart over something that should have brought them together. My father's health had declined. He stopped going to meetings years ago, but this broke something in him anyway. He never said it, but I could see it in the way he looked at the empty chairs during visits. Our mother grew quieter too. She didn't pick sides anymore. She just sat in her chair and stared out the window, as if trying to remember a time when the house was a home, not a war zone. And Clara? She lived in a small apartment across town, alone. She still had a job, but she didn't have her marriage, her house, or the control she once wielded like a sword. Every so often, someone mentioned seeing her at the grocery store or at the gas station. She didn't talk to anyone. She just existed in the same town like a ghost who refused to leave. For a long time, I thought I would feel guilty. I thought I would wake up in the middle of the night, haunted by what I did. But guilt never came in the way I imagined. What came instead was something colder. It wasn't regret. It was acceptance. I hadn't created the war. She had. I had just finished it in the only way that worked. But finishing something doesn't mean you walk away clean. I carried the weight of it in quiet ways. In the way my children asked why we didn't see their cousins anymore. In the way family reunions felt hollow. In the way my mother's face fell when Clara's name came up. People like Clara don't just ruin one relationship. They poison the soil everything grows in. And even when they're gone, the ground never really recovers. She had always hated losing. So even in losing, she found a way to make sure no one really won. I visited the house one last time before the new owners tore down the old porch. I parked across the street and watched it from the car. The walls had new paint. The windows were boarded for renovation. But I could still see everything that happened there, like a film burned into my memory. The meetings, the arguments, the way Clara would sit with that smirk when she blocked every plan I made. I thought revenge would erase that image. It didn't. It froze it in place. The family estate was safe now. The care home bills were paid. No one would lose everything because of her stubbornness anymore. But the cost was steep. Every victory was soaked in the bitterness of what it took to win. The last time I saw Michael, months later, he looked different too. Not broken like her, just free. He told my cousin, not me, that leaving had been the best decision of his life. He didn't remarry. He didn't look back. He walked away from the wreckage and never returned. Clara had spent years trying to control him too. And just like with me, the day he slipped out of her grasp was the day she stopped being who she thought she was. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had kept her secret. If I had let her keep blocking every plan. If I had chosen peace over destruction. Maybe the house would be gone by now. Maybe my parents would have suffered more. Maybe the family would still be fractured anyway. The truth is, she had been pulling us apart long before I ever opened my mouth. Winning against someone like her isn't about walking away with trophies. It's about walking away at all. There was no final apology, no redemption arc, no sudden tearful hug in a hospital room. Clara remained who she was. She didn't forgive. I didn't either. And maybe that's the most honest ending we could ever have. The years will pass, and people will forget the details. They'll forget the legal filings, the meetings, the shouting behind closed doors. But they won't forget that the family was split down the middle by two sisters who could never agree. And no one will say it out loud, but they'll always know exactly when the fracture became permanent. The day I told her husband the truth. Please tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong to finally tell her husband the truth, because this decision didn't just end her marriage. It turned the house where we grew up into a scar that runs through every family gathering. It cost her the man she built her life around. It cost me the family I thought I was protecting, and it cost all of us a kind of peace we'll never get back. And I'm sure she won't be inviting me to her next holiday dinner. Not that she has one anymore.